Britain hadn't built an intercity railway for over a decade, which, considering Britain invented the railway, is a bit like Italy deciding to stop making pasta. So when HS2 was announced, it wasn't just another railway project, it was supposed to be Britain's biggest investment in transport for generations. A railway capable of carrying hundreds of thousands of passengers every day. Trains travelling at over 220 miles per hour, new stations, new jobs, new connections, and a line that would finally bring Britain's overcrowded Victorian railway network into the 21st century. Instead, it has become one of the country's most controversial infrastructure projects. The line to Leeds was cancelled, the Manchester leg was scrapped, costs climbed into the tens of billions, completion dates slipped further and further away, and what was once sold as a railway connecting much of Britain will now stop just outside of Birmingham. So, how did one of Europe's most ambitious infrastructure projects end up here? To understand what happened, you have to go back to the very beginning. By the early 2000s, Britain's railways had a problem. Passenger numbers were growing rapidly. Between the mid-1990s and the late 2000s, rail journeys had more than doubled. Lines had been built during the Victorian era were now struggling to cope with the modern demand. And nowhere was this more obvious than the West Coast Main Line. Running between London, Birmingham, Manchester and Glasgow, it had become one of Europe's busiest mixed-use railways. Fast passenger trains, stopping services, freight trains, all trying to use the same tracks. It's a bit like running Formula 1, the school run, and a bunch of tractors on the same stretch of road. The obvious solution might sound simple, just run more trains. Except you couldn't. The line was already close to capacity on many sections. Adding another train often meant delaying another somewhere else. Britain wasn't running out of trains, it was running out of railway. And unlike adding another carriage, building another railway isn't something Network Rail can squeeze into another bank holiday weekend. That was the thinking behind HS2. Contrary to popular belief, speed wasn't actually the main reason for building it. The biggest objective was capacity. By moving long-distance express services onto a brand new railway, space would be freed up on existing lines. That would allow more commuter trains, more regional services, and more freight. In theory, everyone would benefit. The proposed network was ambitious. The first phase would connect London and Birmingham. From there, the railway would split into a Y shape, one branch heading to Manchester, the other towards Leeds via the East Midlands. Connections to the existing railway would allow trains to continue to places like Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. The project wasn't just about faster journeys, it was about reshaping Britain's transport network. Supporters argued that it could rebalance the economy by improving connections between northern cities and attracting investment outside of London. Estimates suggested that the project could have supported tens of thousands of jobs during construction while unlocking billions of pounds in long-term economic benefits. It was a vision measured not in years, but decades. And for a while, momentum grew. Parliament approved legislation, engineers got to work, land purchases began, construction companies mobilised. By the early 2020s, HS2 had become one of Europe's largest construction projects. At its peak, more than 30,000 people were working across hundreds of sites. Entire landscapes began to change, huge cuttings carved through hillsides, bridges appeared across motorways. The enormous Colne Valley Viaduct slowly stretched across lakes west of London. Deep beneath the Chiltern Hills, tunnel boring machines started carving out one of Britain's longest railway tunnels. If you looked purely at the engineering, the project was extraordinary. If you looked at the bill, it became rather less extraordinary. Because beneath the surface, problems were already beginning to grow. One of the biggest challenges facing HS2 wasn't engineering, it was politics. Infrastructure projects like this take decades to deliver. Governments, on the other hand, change every few years. That means different prime ministers, different chancellors, different transport secretaries, each with their own priorities, each wanting to leave their mark. The result was constant uncertainty. Routes changed, station designs were revised, budgets were reassessed, timelines shifted. Every major change added cost, every delay added cost. And anyone who's ever told a builder, while you're here, could you just, already knows exactly where this story is heading. Take London's Euston Station. It was supposed to become the southern gateway to HS2, a modern station capable of handling new high-speed trains while integrating with the existing network. Instead, it spent years being redesigned, rescaled and debated. At times it felt like the plans were travelling faster than the trains ever would. Years of uncertainty translated into rising costs. It's a simple principle. Construction projects become more expensive the longer they take. Workers stay longer on site, equipment remains hired, materials become more expensive. Contractors have to remobilise. What starts as a design review can quickly become another £1 billion. Then came COVID-19. Like countless major projects around the world, HS2 was hit by supply chain disruption. Steel prices rose, concrete prices increased, energy costs surged, labour became more expensive, inflation swept through the construction industry. Even projects that hadn't changed at all suddenly cost far more than expected. HS2 had changed repeatedly, so inflation amplified problems that had already existed. Environmental commitments also became far larger than originally anticipated. Thousands of hectares of habitat required mitigation. Hundreds of wildlife projects were introduced. Green bridges were designed to reconnect habitats divided by the railway. Ancient woodland compensation became a major issue. Whether you believe those measures were essential or excessive, they all added time, complexity, and cost. Then there was Britain's planning system. Unlike countries such as France or Spain, where high-speed rail has been expanded rapidly, infrastructure projects in the UK often face lengthy consultation periods, legal challenges and planning hurdles. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Protecting communities and environments matter, but it does mean projects take longer. And when projects take longer, they become more expensive. It became a cycle. Costs increase, politicians question the project, reviews delayed decisions. Those delays pushed costs even higher. The business case weakened, which led to even more reviews. HS2 wasn't just battling engineering challenges, it was battling uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the most expensive things you can introduce into any major project. Shortly after the project had started, the headlines had shifted dramatically. The conversation was no longer about what HS2 would achieve, it was about how much it would cost. Original estimates from the late 2000s had grown substantially. Depending on how they were measured and adjusted for inflation, projections climbed well above £100 billion for the full network. Critics argued that the railway had become unaffordable. Supporters argued that cancelling parts of it would simply waste the billions already invested. Both had a point, because by then Britain had reached an awkward position. Too much money had been spent to walk away entirely, but completing the full project would require spending much more. And that's exactly where politics stepped back in. In 2021, the government announced that the eastern leg to Leeds would be abandoned. The reshaped network that had been sold to the public for more than a decade was already starting to shrink. Then came the biggest decision of all. In 2023, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed that the Birmingham to Manchester section would be cancelled as well. What remained was essentially Phase 1, London to Birmingham. The political argument was that money could be spent on a wider range of transport projects across the country. The criticism was immediate, because one of the key benefits of HS2 came from the network as a whole. A line connecting London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds created far more value than a line connecting only London and Birmingham. Cutting the northern section reduced the capacity benefits, the connectivity benefits, and much of the economic case that had originally justified the project. It's a bit like ordering a full breakfast and cancelling the sausage, bacon and eggs because the meal got too expensive. You still get something, it's just not what was originally promised. And that created another problem. A large portion of the cost had already been incurred. Land had been purchased, design work completed, contracts awarded, construction begun, billions had been spent preparing sections that would now never be built. Supporters of cancellation argued that this prevented even larger future costs. Opponents argued that it turned much of the earlier spending into sunk costs. Either way, the public was left looking at a project that had become smaller while remaining extremely expensive. But here's where the story becomes more complicated, because despite the cancellations, HS2 has not stopped. Far from it. Construction continues across the London to Birmingham route. The massive Old Oak Common station in West London is taking shape, and will become one of Britain's largest rail hubs. The Chiltern tunnels continue to be fitted out. Viaducts, bridges and embankments are progressing along the route. When completed, the line will still provide a new high-capacity railway between London and the West Midlands. Journey times will fall, capacity on existing lines should increase, and parts of the network will still benefit. So can you call this a total failure? That depends on what you think HS2 was supposed to be. If success meant building the railway presented to the public in the early 2010s, then it's difficult to argue that the project succeeded. The full Y network won't exist, Manchester won't be connected, Leeds won't be connected, many of the promised national benefits will be smaller than originally advertised. If success means creating a new high-speed railway between London and Birmingham, then the answer becomes less clear, because that railway is still being built, and it will still transform capacity on one of Britain's busiest rail corridors. The deeper question is why the project changed so dramatically. And this is where HS2 becomes a lesson about mega projects rather than just railways. The original vision was designed to last a century, but it was delivered inside a political system that operates on short-term election cycles. Governments wanted the economic benefits, but they also wanted lower costs. They wanted ambitious infrastructure, but they also wanted quick results. They wanted a national network, but they are reluctant to commit to the full price tag. Every attempt to reduce costs changed the project. Every change created delays. Every delay increased costs. Higher costs then triggered further reviews and further cuts. HS2 became trapped in a feedback loop. Perhaps the most striking comparison is with countries such as France and Spain. Both have built extensive high-speed rail networks over several decades. Projects were still expensive, they still faced opposition, but the long-term strategy remained relatively consistent. Britain, by contrast, repeatedly revised fundamental decisions while construction was already underway. Imagine building a house while constantly changing the floor plan. The builder keeps working, but every redesign costs more than deciding what you wanted in the first place. That doesn't mean all the criticism of HS2 was unfair. Some cost estimates were overly optimistic, some risks were underestimated, and some elements of the project became more complex than originally anticipated. But the final outcome was shaped by a combination of engineering challenges, inflation, environmental requirements, planning processes, and political decision-making. No single factor killed the original HS2. Together, they transformed it into something much smaller than the project that had been announced. And that leaves us with the question everyone keeps asking: was HS2 a failure? If you judge it against the vision sold to the public in 2010, the answer is probably yes. The network promised then is not the network being built today. If you judge it against whether Britain will gain a new high-capacity railway between London and Birmingham, the answer is no. The railway is still coming, but perhaps the most important lesson is this: HS2 didn't fail because Britain forgot how to build railways. The tunnels, viaducts, and stations prove that the country can still deliver extraordinary engineering. It failed because Britain kept changing what it wanted HS2 to be. A project designed for the next 100 years was repeatedly reshaped by the politics of the next few years. And in the end, that may have mattered more than the trains, the tunnels, or even the costs. Because HS2 is no longer just a story about a railway. It's a story about how modern Britain plans or struggles to plan major infrastructure. And that's a question that will remain long after the first HS2 trains finally leave the station. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more deep dives into infrastructure and businesses that keep the world moving. And if you'd like to see a video on another project that has spent decades caught between politics and economics, check out my video on Heathrow's proposed third runway, on screen now.